Welcome everybody to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager, and I get to be the host today. Today, I want to thank our sponsor, Mary Meggs Atwater Weavers Guild. A guild who has a name of honor. If you're not familiar with Mary Meggs Atwater, I encourage you to look her up. She was one of the grand dames of weaving way back when, and now this guild has carried on her responsibilities and honor. And I'd like to thank them so much for being a sponsor today. We will take questions as always. The last 15 minutes of the session, if you'll put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. Love your comments in the chat, but I have a hard time seeing them. I'll always see them in the Q&A. Today, we have the one, the only John Marshall. I'm so excited to have him here with us today. John is an American fiber artist specializing in natural dyes and the traditional Japanese technique, katazome, and also tsutsugaki. He is internationally known for his use of color and line to create truly one-of-a-kind artware, turning traditional inspired aesthetics into contemporary treasures for daily life. As a teacher, he's recognized for his ability to adapt traditional recipes and methods to suit local climates, resources, and temperaments, and for his ability to distill complex techniques into easy to understand steps. If you ever talk to someone who's taken his class, they most likely will agree with you on that one. He's authored several books, numerous articles, and he's also well known for his knowledge and use of indigo. Hi, John.
Hi.
Welcome.
You have me on there. Okay, great. That worked.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
All right. First question, what is your favorite tea?
I've got my cup here. I like a blend of matcha, which is a powdered Japanese tea, mixed with kukicha, which is a stem-based tea. And so, yeah, they're chopped up stems of the tea. Yeah, and that's called kuki. Kuki means branch. So kukicha's branch tea combined with matcha, the tea ceremony tea.
Well, I knew you would not have like just Tetley's tea. I knew you would have something special.
Lemon zinger is also nice.
Okay.
You know, that's okay.
All right, that's good. So tell us, how did you get started in fiber?
Actually, the very first memory I have of it is when I was in the crib. Somehow my dad came into a collection of upholstery samples, you know, the kind that had a little paper border zigzagged around the edges or pinked around the edges. And he sewed that together into a booklet and tossed it in the crib with me to play with, and something you could chew on that they could throw on the washing machine, but it had all those different colors and textures to it. So that's my very first memory.
What a great idea.
Yeah, old geezer talking, we made our own toys in those days. You know?
Oh, that's a great idea though. Yeah. You're right though. You can chew on it. You don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what a great stimulus for the child, all those textures and colors.
Yeah.
See, we knew, we have to thank your dad because he started all this.
Yeah, my dad was also the one who taught me to sew originally. So someone in the family he didn't know how to sew, but he somehow found a sewing machine at a thrift store and brought it home and taught himself how to. And then I was the only kid willing to learn. So he taught me. And from there, you know, we would make costumes for our little summer stock theater that our family put on, you know, so make clothes from old thrift store things, you know, to make the costumes and charge kids a penny in the neighborhood to come watch our performances.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. You were theatrical before, you know, you were even able to go to school. That's great.
Yeah, well, both of my parents were school teachers, and so they were very good about encouraging us that way. Yeah.
Well, you've had a strong Japanese influence on your life even before you went to Japan, correct?
My godmother, who is also my fifth grade elementary school teacher, so another teacher, is Japanese American, and we grew up primarily in a Japanese American community. It had been the largest Japanese population outside of Hawaii before World War II, a large agricultural area. And with the war, the town was wiped out as people were sent to the concentration camps, but they came back and reestablished the town. And as it happens, my godmother wound up teaching at the school that she had been barred from as a child, since we had segregated schools at that time. Mm. People think of that as a Southern thing. It's not. It was a national thing. So yeah, she taught us about Japanese culture at the same time, with a little bit of trepidation, because we weren't into enjoying our roots at that time. Okay, it was the melting pot theory, but she did anyway, and she brought her dolls and things like that to class and taught us about right and wrong. She'd use her folk stories that I think she made them up, but with her dolls, to just teach us, you don't steal, you don't harm people, those were basic lessons she felt were important, and could teach them through her dolls and the textiles that she brought us.
Oh, well, you've had several people in your life who's influenced you as well as this teacher, correct?
Yeah. Well, granted, I mentioned my father, of course, but most of them turned out to be women, which is women tend to be a little bit more nurturing and giving that way, I guess. But yes, so there was my godmother. There is also, when I went to Japan, there was a Mrs. Kanematsu, who her son and I were friends. So she agreed to have me come stay with them. And then we've remained friends. She just recently passed away, but we kept in contact all that time. And teachers in Japan, one of the teachers, Kunio Ekiguchi, he was a famous paper craft artist who gave me the introductions I needed. My own teacher, dye teacher, Matsuyo Hayashi. All of these people had their own personalities, but the thing they had in common is that they were very generous and excited to share the love that they had for whatever it was they participated in, and primarily textiles.
Now, you went to Japan like straight out of high school, right?
Well, things were different in those days. So I actually graduated high school when I was 15. You were allowed to leave early, I guess, if they didn't want you anymore. I don't know. But anyway, I'd gone to a year of college and found that no different than high school. So I thought I needed to do something different. So I just went to Japan on a student visa, quickly became an illegal alien, and went about my studies in the traditional processes, traditional arts, for another 5 years.
That's pretty brave. I mean, for a 16, 17-year-old to just go off to stay in Japan?
Well, if we look back and say that, yeah, there are a lot of things I did, a lot of things people allowed me to do that now either Child Protective Services would be called, or the school would get in trouble. I didn't go to 9th grade as an example. The teacher said I could go do what I wanted to. So I went and taught Japanese cultural programs at one of the local elementary schools. I did that full time, as long as I kept my grades up. So, you show up to school, you take the test, fine, you go off. It wasn't, rather that than stay there, be bored, and cause trouble.
Right.
So times were different. And my parents, the one thing I give them the most credit for is they didn't tolerate laziness, and they didn't tolerate stupidity, meaning willful ignorance. Okay. However, mistakes were fine. Everybody makes mistakes. What they didn't tolerate was making it twice. So you make a mistake, great, you learn from it and you go on. But that gave all of us the confidence to try things without being afraid of failing, because in that context, it was a mistake. There's, you can't call it anything else. You screwed up, but it's not a failure. It's a learning opportunity, and you move on from it. And so that, if you want to call that brave or lack of fear, I think it's more like instilling confidence and the ability to trust our own judgment, because we gained judgment through the mistakes we make along the way.
Well, yeah, I could see how that really would form you to be brave enough to take off and go, just to have the confidence. Maybe it's not bravery. Maybe it's the confidence to say, I can go to another country. Did you know the language by that time?
Growing up in the little town I did, well, my father, where he grew up in Wisconsin, the older folks spoke Polish or German to the kids because that was their native language,
Right.
And any caring adult who's speaking to children or grandchildren is going to speak their own language of love. Of course, speaking it in a foreign language is just odd. So of course they would speak to the grandchildren, the kids in the neighborhood in the medium that they felt most comfortable speaking. And so just like now, you see a lot of, say, Latin American immigrants, we hear in my neighborhood, a lot of people speaking Spanish to the children, which is wonderful because of course they would do that. Now, the children, on the other hand, English has become their native language. So my dad responded in English when people spoke to him in Polish. In our neighborhood, people spoke Japanese to us and we responded in English, just as all the Japanese American kids also responded in English. It's their native language too. So that was normal. So I was accustomed to hearing Japanese, but you have to keep in mind it's very old American Japanese. So if it were an English dialect, it would be comparable to Ozark English. So I was accustomed to hearing that. And then I went to language school to learn to speak it better. Because when I went to Japan, of course, we speak standard. And so that was an important linguistic change.
Did you get grief when you were in Japan with your Ozark accent?
No, I didn't use it.
Oh, okay.
I knew that much. The last time most of the people who spoke that have died out now, which is sad. Many decades ago, the last time I heard it, this was after my godparents were dead, was in Hawaii, and a group from the 442nd Brigade, which was a Japanese American unit in World War II. I heard a reunion of them speaking it. And of course, I wasn't part of that group, I was listening. But to give you an example, one of the older ladies was speaking to her granddaughter, who I guess had a white boyfriend, and he spoke some Japanese. And she goes, "Oh, you yo shoberu, huh?" And so what you have is you, English, yo shaberu is Hiroshima Ben, huh is Canadian. I'm sorry, not huh. Oh, you yo shaberu, eh?
Oh, wow.
So that's American, Japanese. And it's heartwarming to hear it because it's all but gone now.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's interesting. It's kind of like Louisiana. They have that French, Cajun, American.
People talk about cultural appropriation, and I don't think that's the right word. I think that we share what we have, and that shares visual culture, musical culture, and linguistic culture also. We're constantly borrowing words. That's appropriation. Nothing wrong with it, because what that does is it improves our ability to communicate. And the same visually. The more we share what we have to say musically as well, the more we find common bonds in beauty. And that's a wonderful thing.
Well, we're going to talk about that more later on, because that is a hot topic these days. And I really want to talk to you more about that. So all these people that have passed on information or shared knowledge with you, and you have done the same, because if the more I read about you and the more I looked at your website, which is an absolute wealth of knowledge. And then you actually found some Japanese dye books that you translated into English, correct?
Well, what I do, I had a friend from Texas come to visit, Deb McClintock. She's a weaver also. And she was here going through some of the books, and she wanted to know about indigo. What's this? What does it say? And I started translating. I go, oh, well, if I'm going to do this for you, I may as well there are other people who are interested. So I do have a fairly large collection of limited edition Japanese dye books, some of them spanning 3 generations, a book that the grandfather wrote, the son wrote, the grandson wrote, all of these different dye recipes, most of them with textile samples inside with the real dye swatches. So that's always fun. And so I started going through those and translate. So when I'm teaching now, I'm focusing not on trying to teach everything, you can't, but I'm trying to teach it from a Japanese perspective using the traditional dyes. Using indigo as an example, people here are wonderfully creative. There are these minor steps to the right, to the left, to adjust things to fit our needs here. That's great. But sometimes after it sort of mutates a bit, you get boxed into a corner and you can't quite figure out what's wrong. Well, it's really good to go back to the basic original recipe and
Oh.
process, so you can trace the changes and go, oh, okay, this is the point where maybe I should have gone this way instead. So that's what I'm hoping to provide, is the foundation information, at least of the Japanese things, and then encourage people to take those and run in whatever direction they choose. And I hope
But
we all benefit from that. I'd
well,
certainly
I
do.
know it's almost like you're doing a pay it forward. You know, you've had people in your life that's helped you, and now you're going to pay it forward to others.
I kind of think of it as paying it backwards, though, actually, because these people gave themselves incredibly in a generous manner. I can't even begin to describe how much I owe them, and this is the way I can pay them back. They were generous in giving to me, they're gone. So the only thing I can really do to do them justice is to share what they gave me and make sure that their memory is kept alive through the processes. Things change, of course they do, but we need to keep them. The techniques were important to them, they're important to me, and I hope they will continue to be important to people in the future.
Well, again, I'm just going to restate what I said, is that you are so generous with your knowledge. And if you haven't seen his website, go to his website. And I mean, a lot of that you could just keep to yourself or sell or put it in a book and sell it. But you really are giving of the knowledge that you have. And I'm just impressed with that, and very thankful too. And I think a lot of people are, that you're sharing that information.
Well, not to seem too altruistic, I do make a living from this. However, I don't think anyone owns knowledge. Some people get very proprietary and threatened if somebody else is doing it. How can you be threatened? You do what you do. If somebody's going to copy you, you're already on to the next thing, hopefully. And if they're stuck with doing that because they can only imitate, well, good for them, you know. But I'm not doing that anymore, so it doesn't matter to me. You know, going for one project, the joy is in the learning, the joy is in the sharing, and it's in the sharing that you learn. Because if people like Deb hadn't asked questions, if my students don't ask questions, if they're not boxed into a corner, then I don't get to learn with them what the solution is, because that's not a problem I ever had. And because I never had it, I didn't have to solve it. And they have that solution. Go, whoa, how'd you get there? Wow. And then you go off on a whole new branch of exploration. That's exciting.
Well, do you think you have learned more, especially about dyeing? Do you think you've learned more about dyeing from like reading and taking classes and being taught? Or do you think you've learned more from experimenting?
Well, it's all of that, because the experimenting comes from the reading and the classes and so forth. So as an example, the Indigo book out that I have out, what I did for that is I went through all the Japanese research that I have here, and some of it's online too, but I have quite a bit here. I don't translate it, because translating it leaves you with directions sounding like IKEA instructions. Okay. We've all experienced that kind of direction. So instead, what I do is I read it, comprehend it, internalize it, leave it aside, do it, because I'm reading in Japanese. Now, when it comes to the other part, what I do is I watch myself do it, and then I remember that in English, and then write what I just saw John do. So in a sense, it's not translating. I think of it as interpreting of a sort. I'm going through the directions, making them mine, testing it, make sure they work, and then share that information with the next person. So that incorporates all of those aspects that you just asked that after.
So this kind of goes into that question also. What do you think is more important? And I'll be interested to hear what you said, because what I have read about you, I've heard you, well, the question is, which is more important to you, product or process? And I have read your articles and interviews, and I've heard you talk about the importance of both. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Which is more important, process or product?
I can't say that, because the product can't be there without the process. And there's no point in pursuing the process if you don't have a product at the end.
Right.
Now, there are many people, and I think this is absolutely legitimate. If you don't want to be a big game hunter in Africa, killing animals, and a really nice alternative to that is to be a birder type who will go out and collect their trophies in photographs or written notes. I think that's wonderful. And you have this wonderful journey and challenge to accumulate, to mark that one off. And that works with dyes. There are thousands of ways to make unlimited numbers of colors, and those are great. And if that's your goal, great. But if your goal is to produce something, you probably only need 4 or 5 dyes. Now, which ones you have in your area will vary. Which ones are better for me are different than the ones that are good for you. But you really, at some point, if you want to use it towards something, you have to stop with the experimenting and actually put it to use. But both are important and both are fun. And one doesn't, necessarily eliminate the other.
Well, your art form that you have chosen to pursue, and I guess I'm talking mostly about the katazome, it's a very controlled process.
Mm-hmm.
And you produce these very precise images. So I know this is kind of a stupid question, but how do you do that? It's so precise.
But there are crutches along the way. Okay, so as an example, I'm not very good at drawing, but I'm pretty good at carving. And so if I'm going to do an image such as the one on the screen, I won't draw the whole thing out. I'll put your art 1A, circles, squares, triangles to create balance. And then I'll go in and carve the paper stencil with my knife to get all of this detail. Once the stencil is carved, I have holes in it. It's a stencil. I push rice paste through that, which sticks to the cloth and blocks out areas like the wax and batik. And then I'll go along with brushes and basically watercolor all of the natural dyes over the rice paste, finish up what needs to be done along that line, and then wash off the paste and the image appears. So it might look complex or daunting as a finished product, but each step taken incrementally as a bite size is quite manageable and enjoyable. Each has its own requirement. I just have to go camping once in a while to get the dyes. I'm required to do that, so I do. I have to do quiet sit-down work, and I really enjoy meticulous, detailed work like that. Other things, I have to deal with textiles, colors, I have to get up and exercise, I have to sit and be quiet. Basically, these are seasonal things that keep you moving. It employs all of my body and all of my mind. And I just feel real fortunate I lucked into this at a very early age.
Well, we've got a detail of this image, a little bit of a detail. I was afraid if I blew it up too much, it would get so blurry, but I just want people to appreciate I think you downplay your skills here, John. But I'm wondering if this matches your personality,
You mean detailed and controlling?
Well, I didn't want to put it that way.
At a party once, there is a woman who was a gypsy from Hawaii, as she called herself, and she wanted to read my palm. And so, sure, I hand it over, and she's going, oh, I see. You're highly opinionated person. And I laughed out loud, said, tell me something everybody else in town doesn't know already. That was a no-brainer. Yeah, I like having control. I'm unemployable, so I've been self-unemployed my whole life because I like to work. And I've been in work situations where they did not tolerate that. I had to sit and be quiet and wait in a carpeting department in the summertime in the Central Valley of California with no customers, while those poor women in housewares were overwhelmed with a sale and I'm not allowed to help them. I can't live that way. So I just would rather not have employees, I have to admit, because I wind up I don't want to give them the grunt work. So I wind up doing that so they can have fun, but then I'm left with no fun. And I'm paying not to have it. So I just wind up doing everything myself. And in that context, yes, all of the dye work fits, and the sewing and the designing and the translating all fits into my sort of hermit personality.
Well, I know that I'm on the other end of that scale. I'm kind of, as everybody knows, I'm kind of all over the place. And I know that like acrylic paint is my thing. Oil, forget it. There's too many steps. Acrylic, I can just do that right now. So I think it's interesting. And again, I'm talking from an art therapist point of view, is that our choice of art materials say a lot about who we are, I think.
It does. It does.
You are obviously passionate about your work, but I think you're also passionate about your space. If you aren't, I am. It's beautiful. And we have a couple of images here. We have the outside of it, and then a somewhat blurry, sorry, this is the best we had, image of the inside of it. So would you talk some about your space, and especially what would you characterize as your relationship with the space that you work in?
I like making things. I always have. I like using my hands and I like using my brain in combination. That said, it doesn't matter what I'm making. I get as much enjoyment out of construction, building rooms, setting up the stud work for a new wall. I get as much satisfaction out of that as carving a stencil. Okay.
Hmm.
So this building I bought around 1996 or so, it had no windows. It had 36 holes. There was a lot. It was a fixer upper, no plumbing, no electricity, no nothing, no plants in the yard, nothing. So I fixed it up, and I've spent the last 35 years doing that, or whatever it is now, 30 years, and enjoy that in between doing my artwork. And so the things you see in the studio are art pieces I've either made or collected as I've traveled around the world. I enjoy living in a beautiful space, although you might not always be able to find it through all the clutter and the piles of, it's like the Sahara Desert. There are these huge mounds of shifting dunes. But the joy of that is every now and again, a dune will shift and something will get uncovered that I forgot I had, and so I don't know if other people could live in my mess, but it's my mess and I enjoy it. And this is what you're seeing as part of that mess. Okay.
I have a little cartoon here that says, for all of you organized people, you don't know the joy of finding something that you thought was lost. I thought, oh, that's true. Yeah.
But there's nothing quite as nice as finally cleaning, having everything pristine, and then being afraid to even stand up for fear of messing it up. But you get over that real quick. But I mean, for the 3 seconds it lasts, it's a joyous thing. So I can certainly understand how people who are more meticulous than I get pleasure out of that as well.
That's funny. Do you and we've got some great images on this next one. I really like this. It's like the process that you do takes an incredible amount of patience, I think. And these images show that you have like several layers, and you've talked about that a little bit earlier, to get from point A to point B. And I don't even have all of them. This is all I can fit on the screen. So now, for me, this would be very stressful of going from all these steps to finally get to the end. Obviously, it's not for you. So what's it like to just keep going over the same thing to get to the end? And if you could talk a little bit about these, if you haven't read the thing underneath that these came from, it won't make any sense.
It could be stressful if you're requiring yourself to know exactly what you're aiming towards. Okay. Now I have to admit, if I'm traveling, I need a destination. I'm not the kind of person who's going to just take a road off to the side. I don't do that with travel. With artwork, I do. With textiles, I do. So the very first slide is a stencil that I would have carved for this process. The second slide, the ochre in the background is the rice paste sitting on the cloth, protecting it, blocking that area, keeping it white. The vermilion and then the purple you see are the different colors that I've prepared, either pigments or dyes. Okay, they're both natural. Apply those to this Okinawan process called bingata. It's katazome, same thing. And then eventually, once those are built up and cured, wash it, and you have the final product on the end. But each one's a separate step. And it's like a conversation. You can have a conversation and maybe you have a reason for talking to that person and you really need to get to the end. But if you're stressing about making your point a half hour from now, you're not going to enjoy getting there. On the other hand, if you have a totally interactive conversation and you're letting it go where it goes, you may never wind up at your goal. But if you can let go of that goal and enjoy the process and make the decisions along the way, then no, there is no stress involved for me.
It's just beautiful. And you use natural dyes, correct?
Yes, I only use natural dyes.
I love
Now,
the color intensity because, people say you can't get intense color with natural dyes. These are gorgeous.
well, natural dyes, keep in mind that means dirt also, not just onion skins. And so all kinds of things are natural. Rocks are natural, minerals are natural. Those are natural dyes also. And that's this being gata technique that I practice. In Okinawa, the sun was so intense that many types of vegetable dyes would fade. So in order for them to have the bright tropical colors, they turned to minerals. And Okinawa is really blessed with a massive range of minerals. But if applied properly, it really doesn't change the hand at all, and is quite. They just don't, dirt don't fade. It's just it's there.
Yes, living in Georgia, we've learned that. Yeah,
yeah, especially with
got that lovely
clay.
red clay. There is an awareness of, and we started talking about this earlier, there's an awareness of cultural appropriation in which, and in artwork, people view that as an inappropriate or unacknowledged use of the cultural images or technologies in artwork. Now, your work is greatly influenced by the Japanese culture. And we've got an image here I wanted to show because of a lot of the imagery looks very Japanese, at least to me. So what is your view, if you continue that conversation you started earlier?
Well, cultural appropriation implies that you're stealing it. Okay?
Right.
That someone has gained through someone else's loss. Okay, but to me, that's like knowledge also. Now, I can go in as a corporate spy and steal your secret and sell it, which will cause you harm. Yes, that's appropriation of a sort. But for me to listen to the music or to hear at a distance a grandmother singing a lullaby, and then to have that touch me and take it and sing it to my own children, is that cultural appropriation? No, I doubt very seriously that grandmother, wherever she's from, would even consider that, and probably would be very happy that my children are lulled by it. Okay, so if your goal is to steal from somebody, then it doesn't matter what you call it, you're still stealing it. And if you're harming them, then so much more so. However, when someone shares something and it speaks to you and you interpret it and make it your own, then nothing is stolen. It's a gift that's received and given back to the next person. And I have to say, I'll use Japan as an example. If you want to talk about, and I wouldn't use this word myself, but appropriation, Japan's the end of the Silk Road. They appropriated everything, okay, and generally made it better. Okay, I mean, we see that with electronics and things and digital. We see that with the textiles. All of these textiles that were produced all along the Silk Road wound up in Japan. A great many of them died out in the region of origin, but they're still produced in Japan. There are people in Japan who still wear poodle skirts, okay? So nothing dies out in Japan. So it's the great repository of knowledge and fun, if you want to look at poodle skirts as an example. I don't see what the point is. True, if someone's stealing something, that's different. And if it harms the other person, but I can't see where cultural sharing harms anyone at all. So
well, I want to talk. I do want to talk a little bit about your book on indigo. I think we have an image of it here. What was the attraction of indigo? Because people love indigo. It's like magic, right? It goes from this color to blue, and and it's natural. There's really a strong attraction to indigo.
Well, thank you for that setup. But if you want an honest answer, indigo is the least interesting of the dyes to me. If truth be told.
Yeah, you can tell I'm not a dyer, right? Oh my gosh.
So blue is wonderful. And it's a very important part. And indigo blue in particular is seemingly miraculous for what it does, because at least Persicaria, which is the Japanese indigo that I use, it also gives purples and it gives yellows and it gives greens. It doesn't give just blue. All those colors come from the same plant. So to me, that's mind-boggling. But all plants give many colors. And the indigo book seemed to be one that people were interested in. And it was the easiest one to write of all the books I'm writing. So because it's contained. It's the other dye books that are harder because they're more complicated and there are more steps involved. And people are sometimes intimidated by them. Whereas indigo is inviting to everyone. You can just take a leaf and rub it on a piece of cloth.
Yeah.
And right there you have something exquisite. So it's fun writing. It's fun sharing because it makes me codify, crystallize my own ideas and approaches to things.
Well, it's a fun book, and it's nicely kind of walks you through the process. I never thought about that, is that in some ways it is easy to get a color out of indigo.
Yeah, it's pretty much foolproof. A good friend, Cheryl Lawrence in Washington State, she did have trouble with the indigo. We're talking 30 years or so ago, and she had worked at it, and it just didn't. So finally she just says, forget the whole thing. She just started dumping stuff in and paying attention. She called it her crybaby indigo recipe, and it worked just fine. Real simple example, all these fancy things. Now, there are degrees of quality, of course, okay? Right. There's a wonderful dyer in this country, Roland Ricketts, who studied the traditional Japanese and does absolutely fantastic, exquisite, high level. I'm not talking about that, but if you just wanted to get it to work, I took a bunch of leaves from my yard, and I have to admit, I put them in the refrigerator and forgot they were there for a year. So it's like lettuce in the year. It's way past its freshness state, totally decomposed. Well, I don't throw anything away. So I took that and I threw it in a bin. Okay, now I'm going to reduce it. So I took some ash from my fireplace, construction 2x4s, who knows what was in the newspaper, whatever ash was in the fireplace. And I dumped that in. And then I added water. And then I stirred it around. And then I stirred it some more and went away for a week and stirred it some more. And then I added some pickling lime to it and stirred it up, dipped my cloth in, beautiful blue, no problem.
Huh.
That's it. And I've kept that vat going for 6 years now. But now, it's just, as long as you know how it works. If you know that adding salt to your stew makes it salty, then you pay attention to how much you put in. And so with indigo reduction vat, at least, the rule is you need to get the pigment out of the leaf. Rotting in the refrigerator did that. You need to introduce some kind of microorganism to use up the oxygen in the vat. You need to give a few other minerals for it to react with, which is somewhere in all of that wood ash. Okay. And then you need to bring the pH up to a certain level, which is what the lime did. So you had the pigment, the additional minerals required, and the pH. That's just so, and the rest is just to taste.
So where did you get your science background? I mean, you seem to understand the science of it. Were you a science kid in school, or?
No, Sharon Tanaka used to let me copy her science papers. So I hope Sharon's not listening. or more to the point, her grandkids. Okay. Science was easy for me, but it wasn't interesting. And so I was off in other areas. But now over time, you have to, just like if you really want to get into cooking, you need to know some basic chemistry. You can do trial and error, and that works fine. You make exquisite things. But if you really want to know why it's happening, you can't avoid the chemistry part of it. And that's fun because now I have a reason to know. In high school, I didn't. Okay.
Well, you said you went outside and got some indigo. Now, when you're doing your natural dyes, are you using a lot of plants in your area? Do you buy the
both
dyes, or?
Both. I grow some in my yard. I have, some madder and some marigolds. I like marigolds quite a bit for yellow. And I have persimmon tree for persimmon tannin and so forth, and a large patch of the Japanese indigo. But most anything will make a dye. And there are a lot of things it's quite frankly just easier to buy. If I'm after making a certain product, a certain image, like as an example, orpiment is not something I would want to mine myself because that's arsenic. Okay, in the traditional Okinawan dyes, arsenic and mercury are important parts of it. Now you use them safely and they're not toxic. Okay, if used appropriately, they're not toxic for the dyer, they're toxic for the miner. Okay, that's a huge difference. But there are substitutes that are being made nowadays, and I'll buy certain things like that. So I have a proper repertoire. But I do enjoy making them. I just don't need to score points in heaven for suffering along the way. Okay, that's not my goal at the moment.
So are you still teaching?
Oh, yeah. With the pandemic, this whole online thing certainly shifted that. I have to admit, in some ways, I prefer the online teaching. It's not the same as teaching in person with the interaction. But the good part of it is we're not standing and watching the pot boil for an hour. The bad part is you're not standing and watching the pot boil, so you're not visiting, which goes along with that. But I can zoom in really close and show details that a group of people would never be able to see. And like with any of these things, if you're going back and watching Zoom or downloading it or something, you can go back and play it over and over again until you've understood what's happened. Okay. The piece in back of me, as an example, is one that I'm working on with a class right now where we're doing vegetable printing. So we're using potatoes, carrots, parsnip to carve our blocks. And then we're printing with marigold and barberry and cochineal to do the tapestry that I have in back. Now, that's not finished yet. There's still some details, but it just shows you what you can do with your farmer's market vegetables and a couple of garden flowers and a bug or two. Okay.
Yeah, we've already got somebody asking about the your tapestry. So they wanted to know what it was.
And this was not a class I'd taught before, and it's quite honest. It's called sarasa. It's something I did 50 years ago, but I haven't done it in between, but someone requested that class. And so I thought, sure. So again, you pull out the Japanese research, the periodicals and all of that, freshen my brain, go see what the market has down the street, see what's still in the fridge from last Christmas, and put it to use. And it's fun. That's the fun part that online teaching allows, because I can stop between sessions and answer the question and have a whole week maybe to prepare for it, to really show what I want to, the point I want to make. And that'll mean making another sample, or maybe ordering something from Amazon really quick so it's in time to make that point, which in a real life situation, you have to give a general cursory verbal description and move on.
Hmm. So what's next for you? New book, new approach to another artwork?
For next month, not next month, for next year, what I'm working on right now, and I've been planning this for about 30 years, is sort of a Textile of the Month club. And so what I'm hoping to do, I've got it all set up, but it'll be a free YouTube thing, about a half-hour class talking about a given individual textile. Like the first one in December will be bingata, this Okinawan technique. And there's a half-hour class, not a full how-to, but it's more for textile collectors or people who want a general introduction. And then for those who want to, there's a subscription that goes with it of the textiles used in the talk. And so those are mailed out once a month, like Book of the Month Club. And for those, and then those folks participate in the Zoom recording so they can ask questions. The subscription people can ask questions for a half hour afterwards. So it becomes a mini class. And then normally later that same month, I will be offering a more expanded class, maybe a 3 or 5 day class on the particular subject. So bingata is one, but cut and uncut combination velvet is another. Ikats would be another one. Sarasa are other ones. Not all of them are techniques I can teach. I don't do velvet, but I can show you the Japanese. I can show you 24 karat woven gold velvet, which is something to behold, So these are all things I have in my collection. It's a 14,000 square foot studio that I have here. And it's chocked full of boxes after boxes, and I need to get them out there. So I figured this is one way. I don't want to just dump them out there. I want people to know what they're getting.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this is a way of sharing the knowledge, have them appreciate what they want, and they can move on to doing the technique or remain in the appreciators category, the collectors category, whatever they choose. So I'm getting all that set up. It'll be up on my website within the next few days. I've just not quite done yet.
Well, once again, folks, you heard it here first. Textiles and tea. We get the cutting edge of everything.
There you go.
But again, it's just so generous of giving. I know you're getting paid for it, but still, of giving of your collection like that. What a great way to share that.
Well, the real motive was to get it out of here because, I'm not getting younger. People in my family don't live terribly long. And so when I'm gone, what's going to all go to Salvation Army? And so I'd much rather it went out piecemeal here and there to people who actually want it. So from a PR point of advertising point of view, the prices are actually pretty low compared to the textiles.
Yeah.
These bolts in Japan sometimes are tens of thousands of dollars. Now, I didn't pay for that because I bought them through bankruptcy sales and through collecting and stuff, but that's their actual value. And so if you can have a piece of a $10,000 textile without paying that much, well, then sometimes a piece is actually more beautiful than the whole. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that leaves your imagination open to what it might have been. When you actually see what it was, it's beautiful, but not as good as your imagination.
Right, right.
A scrap has potential. And so I'm hoping other people will look at it that way.
Well, we have lots of questions. Can we go to questions?
Okay, certainly.
Actually, you also have a lot of hellos, and we love you. And I knew we'd get those. So
well,
Fern Handler says, hello, John.
Hi.
And Lisa Deller wants to know, are those translations available to acquire? And I'm assuming she's talking about the translation that we were talking about way at the beginning, that you translated those books.
No, because again, translation perhaps was not quite the right term for me to have used. What I do is I read them, okay, and then I follow the directions in Japanese. So I'm just internalizing it in Japanese. Okay. Then I leave that and do the process and then write. So no, that kind of professional translating, so it's actually not in direction, not in IKEA English, okay? That's a whole other skill that I don't have.
This is from Susan Bartkey. Says, hello, John.
Hi,
it was
Susan.
Wonderful to see you again. And she said she's sorry to hear of Mrs. Kanematsu passing. The summer class when she was there is such a favorite memory of mine. Yeah. Do you still hold classes? She says she needs a refresher.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, Susan. It's good to hear from you. I probably won't begin in-studio classes until next summer. Part of it's the pandemic, but part of it's still because they're lingering parts of it. But part of it also is just trying to get ahead of all of these plans I have for, the online things. And when I do, it'll probably be more for people like you, Susan, who have been here before, or people who have had several courses from me, just to kind of keep it manageable.
Wendy Arnott, she said she'd like to get a copy of your book, Salvation Through Soy. Is it still available? And she says she's particularly interested in using soy milk as a binder.
Yeah, the booklet itself is not available in printed form, but what I've done on my website is I've expanded it by doing video clip directions, and the PDF version of that booklet is downloadable as part of that class. And often it'll be downloadable like my sewing book, the Make Your Own Japanese Clothes. I'm doing a sewing class at the moment through MAFA, and that's part of that download. You just go ahead and get it. It's out there, so I'd rather use it. But again, that's part of these other online classes that are simply included in it. Okay, but thank you for asking. I didn't plant her, really.
Oh, okay. See, you're just so generous. You're so giving. Susan again wants to know, what paper do you use for stencils, and do you still have actual mulberry?
Yeah, I use the, it's called shibugami. It's Japanese handmade mulberry paper that's been lacquered with persimmon tannin and smoked. And so, yes, actually I have a good supply of that. I bought up a massive amount of it years ago when it was looking like it wasn't going to be there anymore. And so I try to keep ahead of supplies, and all that's on my website under the little sales, supply section.
Okay. I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. This is from Linda Johnson. Wasn't Bingata once only for royalty? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Bingata, certain types of Bingata, certain colors and things were certain styles of bingata were reserved for the king and his court, but it was always used as trade, as tribute, again, to keep China and Japan at bay. They would buy them off. And as long as they could keep China supplied with highly coveted textiles, and as long as they could do the same with Japan, neither one wanted to risk losing access. So neither country invaded Okinawa. Okay, they pitted them against each other. The Chinese were afraid Japan would retaliate. Japan was afraid China would. And Okinawa was very savvy about playing them off, using not just bingata, but ikat and several other weaves. And so as a result, the Okinawans continually brought it up to a higher and higher level, and which is why we have the quality that we have now. Someone paid for it, basically.
The history of fiber.
Yeah.
This is Sue Sari. Hi, Sue. Has John experienced weaving the Japanese technique of Sayori? And this is an intuitive style of creating cloth and comfort and just letting go.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm not a weaver. I know how to weave, but that's very different than being a weaver. So I was trained in weaving when I first went to Japan, but that was so that we could weave the textiles for the dolls I was being trained in. That's also how I learned the katazome and other things. But again, that's different. Than knowing how is very different than actually being a weaver who practices it. So I leave that up to all of you. And I'm glad that you have that as your passion.
Catherine Reed said, I didn't know indigo produced other colors than blue. How do you get the other colors? Well, that's a full-blown workshop, Catherine.
Yeah, it is.
We can get into that. But I have to agree, I didn't realize there were other colors. To me, indigo always meant blue. So, but I know a book that might be able to help her with that, right?
Huh? Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Oh, Carrie Gordon wants to know, what colors do sing for you? I guess she's referring to your book. Soil, plants. I guess she's asking what other colors do you like on the natural color?
This might sound a little bit, when I'm producing colors, I often don't talk to some of the other natural dyers about it, the people who are out practicing broadly. Michelle Whipplinger is an example, and I used to lock horns in a friendly way because we had a very different approach to it. Michelle was wonderfully meticulous. I mean, I used to joke that she'd measure in microns, okay? Whereas my way of dyeing is my way of cooking. If it's on the counter from last night, we'll put it in the stew tonight. Who cares? You know, and my dyes are the same way. So one of the dyes I've been using a lot recently might seem a little bit gross to you, but cochineal, you know, is an animal, is an insect. And like any meat product, it will rot like meat does. But you have to keep it refrigerated if you're going to use it for any period of time. But eventually it goes past the coagulated stage like blood would, okay? And it takes on a little bit of an aroma, but it gets past the aroma and it gets past that stage and it turns into this most beautiful, deep, complicated maroon, red, black kind of color, especially if you don't remember what mordants you put in, because it might have 12 or 8 different mordants at that point, because I've been using it for a minute. But eventually it always winds up at that black maroon color. And I find that when I dye with it, like in printing, all of those colors show through, depending on how thick it is and depending on how the weave is hitting. So that's one of my all-time favorite colors. Not something that is always sanctioned in the natural world for getting a color, but does it for me.
Where and how are you advertising your current classes?
Mostly on my website. I'm pretty lazy about that. I used to deal with a gallery in San Francisco called Obiko, which was an art to wear gallery many of you will be familiar with. And Sandra Sakata was just a wonderful businesswoman, very, very savvy. And she had a policy of preferring word of mouth, actually. Now, this is certainly acting as advertising for me, and it's a form of word of mouth. But I am not after 100,000 followers or anything. I would rather lecture to a group where only 4 people who are interested showed up than have 100 people who are indifferent and need to get someplace. Okay, it's a lot more satisfying. So this way, I stumble along, people find out, they hit my website by accident. All of my classes are listed on my website. I have a newsletter that you can access through my website. I don't pester you. I don't tell you what my cats are doing or anything like that. You know, I'm always interested in my friends' cats, but you know, I'm interested in my cats. I figure you're not. But I do tell you about what programs are coming up. I'll tell you a cultural story if I have one at that moment, and share what my thoughts are, or pass along other people that I've heard about that I think might be of useful to you. So that's what's on the newsletter. I'll have one coming out probably in the next few days or so as it happens. But you can go to my website and sign up for that. You have to sign up yourself. I don't sign up people because I want to make sure it's not spam for you.
It is a lovely newsletter. I do encourage you all to take a look at it. Several people have been asking about the mulberry paper, and someone else just stated that you sell that on your website, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So if you're looking for mulberry paper,
or actually any of the traditional supplies, I try to keep them. And also Maiwa in in Canada is also a good source for many of the traditional things, especially for our Canadian viewers. You know, so shop around and find it. But I think it's pretty much Maiwa and I are the ones who supply the traditional Japanese products.
Yeah, the website is in the chat. If you'll scroll back through, and then I will show it in a minute as we go through the rest of this program. Somebody wants to know, do you have blue fingers?
Not today. not today, because I was videotaping one of the courses coming up, and so I really need to scrub them. It's one of the rare times I have shorter fingernails and nothing under them. But yeah, people in town know when I've been dying.
Yeah. Here on Textiles and Tea, nothing is sacred. We are going to ask about everything.
Not just hands, clothes, face, hair, everything. It's all over.
Well, John, I can't believe that we have to stop for today. This has been delightful. Thank you so much for being on here.
Fun for me too. I really appreciate all of you who tuned in. You know, it's good to
we want to thank also our sponsor, Mary Miggs Atwater Weavers Guild. Excuse me. It was very kind of them to support your
yes, thank you.
episode today. And here it's, I'm sorry, Mandy, I'm jumping ahead of you, aren't I? Also here we have John's website. And if you're interested, it's also in the chat. It's johnmarshall.to, not .com, not .org, but .to. So keep that in mind. And be careful, there's lots of John Marshalls out there. So if you Google it, you may or may not get there.
If you're not sure, the easy thing to do is Google John Marshall. You'll get every law school in the country, okay? Do John Marshall and Japan, or John Marshall silk, or John Marshall dye, then I'll be the first one that comes up.
There you go. I did indigo, and boom, there you were. So I always do John Marshall indigo, and there you show up. You're right. You either get the historic figure or you get the law school. Silly people. Who cares about that? It's this John Marshall, the John Marshall. I do want to thank our sponsors. And if you're interested in sponsoring an episode of Textiles and Tea, like Mary Miggs Atwater Weavers Guild did, please go to our website and you can sign up for an episode. You can either do it by the person who's going to be on. You can do a special date for your guild. Just let us know. If you have any questions, you can give me a call at the office. We'll be glad to talk to you about that. If you are interested, we're still doing our 100 donations. Thank you, Sue. She gave us a donation at a conference I was at this weekend. Sweet of you. We're trying to do $100 donations by November the 29th, which will be our 100th episode. And we're really excited because we will have Sheila Hicks as our guest that day. Some of you younger weavers, if you don't know who Sheila Hicks is, look her up. She is a trailblazer in fiber arts, and she's done some incredible work over the years. So we are excited to have her for our 100th program. So $100 donations. We want 100 of those by November the 29th. So if you're thinking about donating, now would be a great time to do that. Thank you. You can do that at wespendie.org. If all these donations that we get, they help support our programming, such as the Spinning and Weaving Week that we just had, the Careers in Textiles, the Guild retreats. All of those are supported by the donations that you make to the Fiber Trust, and we do thank you for that. It's very special. Next week, we are going to have Tabitha Arnold. She is a rug maker, but she does it a little bit different than anybody else. So check her out if you get a chance. John, again, thank you. It's always wonderful seeing you.
Thank you.
I look forward to this.
If I could say one last thing to people,
please
make sure everyone knows that you can view all of the past Textiles and Tea episodes on YouTube. Okay, make sure they have this whole past library. If you missed one you wanted to see before, just Google it in YouTube and it'll come right up for you.
Thank you, John. I forgot to mention that. And that's true. You can watch it on Facebook. And I know a lot of people don't like Facebook, but you can also watch it on YouTube. And also, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notice when we upload the next episode. And so you can watch John again. Who wouldn't want to watch John again, right? Thank you all so much. Have a great week. We look forward to seeing you next week. And don't forget, happy tea.
Okay.